There were days when the galaxy felt like a dying beast, exhaling its last breaths into the cold void. Those breaths carried the scent of ash, of worlds burned to the mantle, of prayers that never found their way to the Emperor's ear. In that fading echo, amidst the broken remains of a once glorious Imperium, Achilles lived. Not as a legend, not as the invincible warrior sung by poets, but as a man displaced from time itself, dragged through the immaterial currents of the warp, torn from ancient Troy and hurled into an age where even gods bled and empires drowned under their own weight. He had wandered battlefields older than civilizations, crossed hull corridors lined with the carcasses of titanic machines, and stood before shrines where the names of heroes were listed alongside the names of monsters. In the Imperium, they often meant the same thing. This was his life now, drifting from warzone to warzone, fighting under banners he did not recognize, alongside soldiers who regarded him with fear, reverence, or something in between. He was an anomaly in armor scavenged from fallen Astartes and mortal regiments alike, a relic of an era long forgotten, wielding a spear reforged by tech priests who argued for years about how such primitive metallurgy could bond with ceramite. Yet it had. The spear obeyed him as willingly as it once had on the plains of Ilion. And still, despite the countless battles, Achilles felt the emptiness, an absence of purpose. In Troy he had known clarity, glory, honor, rage, fate. Here, the galaxy swallowed such concepts whole. What was honor to a Hive Fleet? What was glory to the warp? What did fate mean when billions died each day without their names ever being spoken? He awoke that morning with the familiar weight in his chest, the kind men carried when they had outlived every prophecy meant for them. Dawn did not exist on this world. The sky was a permanent storm of industrial smog and flickering void light, leaking through the atmosphere from orbiting debris fields. He stepped outside the bunker, boots crushing the dead soil that had once nurtured forests but now crumbled like bone dust. The air tasted metallic, the wind carried the cry of faraway bombardments. Another day, another battlefield, another cycle in a universe that demanded everything and returned nothing. But the message arrived before he could ready his spear. At first, he did not notice it. A low hum echoed through the bunker walls, a frequency too refined to belong to mortal vox channels. Moments later, a servitor dragged its half-mechanical frame toward him, its flesh slack, its eyes replaced by twin red lenses glowing with an intelligence that was not truly its own. A panel unfolded from its ribcage, projecting a beam of golden light. Achilles froze, for he recognized that symbol, the twin-headed eagle of terror, rendered in immaculate detail, surrounded by the seal of the High Lords themselves. The servitor spoke with a voice that belonged to no living throat, a voice shaped by the authority of an empire millions of worlds wide. Achilles, you are commanded to present yourself before the Imperium. Your presence is required. Your deployment is classified. Failure to comply is impossible. Impossible. Not forbidden. Not discouraged. Impossible. The word slithered through him, familiar in its power. The Olympians had once spoken to him in such absolutes, but those were gods of marble and lightning. These were rulers of a fractioned empire on the brink of ruin. Was there truly a difference anymore? The message ended. The projection flickered out. The servitor collapsed, its purpose fulfilled, its source of animation severed. Achilles stared at its limp body for a long time. Why summon him? Why now? Had the Imperium finally tired of using him as a blunt instrument, directing him to whatever desperate front needed a temporary salvation? Or was this something deeper, something more akin to prophecy? He did not trust terror, but he trusted even less the silence of unanswered questions. His thoughts churned like a storm. Doubt crept in, rare, unwelcome, but persistent. Achilles had been the pinnacle of mortal warfare in his time, chosen by destiny, blessed by the river Styx. But the Imperium did not deal in mortal warfare. It fought nightmares. It waged war against time, entropy, hunger, and the unmaking of reality itself. What role could one ancient warrior play in such a theater? And yet, beneath the doubt, he felt it, that old, buried, burning. The first flicker of the fire that once drove him to charge against walls, against armies, against fate. the fire that made his name echo through millennia. Here, in this brutal age, the fire felt different, colder, heavier, sharpened by the weight of uncountable dead. The galaxy was calling to him. No, something within the galaxy was calling. He returned to the bunker and gathered his few belongings, his spear, his reforged armor, a cloth depicting the crude emblem of the regiment he had once saved. Perhaps it meant something to them. Perhaps it meant nothing. To Achilles, it served as a reminder. Even in a world soaked in despair, some still believed in salvation, however fleeting. As he fastened his gauntlets, he noticed his hands trembled not from fear, but from recognition. He had felt this trembling before marches into battles destined to shape history, before facing Hector outside the walls of Troy, before defying kings and gods alike. Something awaited him, something vast. Outside, thunder rolled not from any storm, but from the thrusters of a descending craft. The dust clouds parted as a massive gunship settled before the bunker. Its hull bore scars from 100 campaigns. Its engines roared like chained beasts. An honor guard of space marines stepped out, their ceramite the color of midnight, their visors glowing like dying stars. They formed a line, not of hostility, but of reverence, or perhaps caution. The tallest of them spoke. "Achilles, by order of Terra, you are to be escorted to the high fortress. The galaxy shifts, the Imperium bleeds, and you have been chosen." Chosen. Again that word. It tasted familiar, bitter. Achilles approached the gunship, each step heavy with the weight of unspoken destiny. He felt the eyes of the Astartes on him, assessing, calculating. Even among giants, he did not feel small, but he did feel the cracks in the galaxy widening. He could hear them like distant screams trapped beneath the fabric of reality. Millions dying each hour, stars flickering out, worlds praying for help that would never arrive. A man could go mad listening to the galaxy die, or he could answer its call. As the gunship doors closed behind him and the engines ignited, he allowed himself a final glance at the wasteland he was leaving. It had been another temporary home, another scar on a life defined by them. Soon it would be forgotten, consumed by a war too vast to comprehend. But Achilles would not be forgotten. Not anymore. Terror had called him. The High Lords had invoked his name. The galaxy whispered in fear, and in that whisper, Achilles felt the stirrings of fate, ancient, relentless, inevitable. He closed his eyes. The crusade had not yet begun, but the darkness had already taken shape. The gunship clawed its way through the choking atmosphere, its engines screaming defiance against gravity and exhaustion alike. Inside, the air was thick with recycled breath, machine oil, and the faint copper scent of old blood that never entirely left the walls of vessels like this. Achilles sat in a restraint harness bolted to the deck, his spear resting upright between his knees, its haft vibrating gently with the tremor of the ascent. Opposite him, the space marines were statues. Their armor was a monolith of void black, marked only by devotional etchings and battle scars that spoke their own silent litanies. They did not speak. They did not need to. Men who had seen too much of war and too little of peace rarely wasted words. Achilles watched them, wondering how many of them had outlived their own legends, as he had. How many bore names that no one remembered anymore. How many had fought and killed and bled until even victory tasted like ash. Above all of them, the hull shuddered as the gunship broke free of the last thin grip of atmosphere and surrendered itself to the void. Silence. Not true silence, there was always the faint hum of engines, the subtle creak of metal cooling after the strain of re-entry, but the vast, open silence of space, where sound existed only inside the walls men built to protect themselves from the nothing. Achilles unfastened his restraints as the gunship leveled out, guided toward a new destination. Through a small, reinforced viewing slit, he saw it. At first, it was only a dark shape against the endless black, partially eclipsing a distant star. Then the details emerged. Jagged cathedral spires rising from its dorsal spine, weapon batteries bristling along its flanks like serried teeth, kilometer-long hull plates etched with prayers and oaths in a dozen dead languages. It was less a ship and more a floating citadel, a cathedral weapon forged from faith and steel, a Titangent-class warship, an instrument of annihilation on a scale even Achilles had not yet grown numb to. It glided through the void like a predator, dragging behind it the accumulated sins of 1,000 campaigns. Apollo's chariot had once been praised for dragging the sun across the sky. This vessel dragged with it a shadow over any world unfortunate enough to fall within its range. The gunship adjusted course, engines growling as it aligned with a docking bay yawning open like the maw of some steel leviathan. Lights traced a path inward, guiding them into the belly of the beast. As the gunship settled onto the deck with a final heavy tremor, the ramp hissed open, revealing a cavernous hangar that could have swallowed entire cities from Achilles' original age. Servitors scuttled across the floor on spidery limbs, carrying containers, ammunition, machine parts. Pilots barked status reports. Tech priests moved like robed phantoms, chanting binary prayers as they anointed engines and weapons with sacred oils. The scale of it all pressed down on him. War had grown larger here, more obscene. In Troy, they had fought for a city. Here, they fought for the faint chance that humanity might exist long enough to see another millennium. "Move," one of the Space Marines said, his voice a deep, vox-distorted growl. Not unkind, but absolute. Achilles stepped down the ramp, feeling the deck vibrate under his boots. Gravity here was heavier, calibrated to the ship's needs rather than comfort. The air smelled different, filtered, metallic, saturated with incense and the faint tang of ozone from constant weapon testing. He turned, taking in the organized chaos of the hangar. Transports being refueled, fighters being wheeled into launch positions, troops marching in tight formations, drills shouted in a dozen dialects. It was a city of war, and every citizen had only one purpose: to serve the Imperium's endless hunger for sacrifice. A figure unlike the others approached a man wrapped in layered robes of red and brass, half his face a lattice of augmetics. Cables descended from his skull into a spine of machine plates, and his eyes glowed with a harsh, mechanical light that never blinked. A tech priest. "You are the anomaly designated Achilles," the priest stated, rather than asked. His voice was filtered through voxcasters, a chorus of tones layered atop one another, warp extracted, pre-imperial origin, catalogued and cleared for deployment. Achilles tilted his head slightly. "Achilles is sufficient. Names are inefficient labels," the tech priest replied. "But in this case, yours carries statistically significant weight. Mythos influences morale, morale influences performance, performance influences survival probabilities." "So you dragged a myth onto your warship," Achilles said quietly, "hoping it will comfort those who are about to die?" The priest's augmetic eyelids clicked. "We dragged a weapon that believes itself to be a man. Hope is optional. Utility is not." The Space Marine who had spoken before stepped forward. "You will be briefed soon. Until then, you will be escorted to a secured chamber. There are others you will meet. Others chosen." His tone made it clear that chosen was closer to claimed. Achilles nodded once. He had expected as much. There was never just one piece on the board in games played at this scale. As they walked through the ship's interior corridors, he absorbed every detail. Pipes carrying sacred oils and coolant fluids ran along the ceilings, inscribed with cautionary litanies. Auspex panels flickered with readouts he could not interpret, yet he could sense their urgency. The distant rumble of engines was a heartbeat, steady, ancient, and tired. They passed a viewing port where the stars hung like silent witnesses. Achilles paused, only briefly, to look out. He saw not constellations, but potential battlegrounds. Every point of light might be a world waiting to burn. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said from behind him. He turned. The speaker was a man of mortal stature, wrapped in a long cloak half burned at the edges, his chest protected by carapace armor marked with the sigil of the Inquisition. His eyes were sharp, too sharp, as if they had learned to see too much. "Or terrifying," the Inquisitor added, "depending on who's looking." "Both," Achilles said. "Usually both." The Inquisitor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You'll fit in well here, I suspect." They resumed walking. Achilles was led into a wide chamber that might once have been a shrine, now repurposed into a tactical vestibule. Holo-projectors cast spectral maps into the air clusters of stars, highlighted sectors, crimson marks indicating conflict zones. Around them stood others, a knot of space marines from different chapters, identifiable by their varying colors and heraldry, a cadre of hardened human officers, a psyker with a shaven head and eyes that never quite focused on the material world. They all turned as Achilles entered. For a heartbeat, the room felt like a theater where the actors had just noticed a new, unannounced cast member step onto the stage. "That's him," someone muttered. "The one from before the Imperium. A legend," another voice whispered. "A weapon dressed as a man." Achilles ignored the murmurs. He had worn many skins in his life: hero, monster, savior, traitor. He knew how to bear the weight of stories thrown at him like chains. The Inquisitor moved to the center of the chamber and spoke with the easy authority of someone who could order a planet scourged to the bedrock and not dream of it later. "Look around you," he said. "Every one of you has been pulled from the jaws of some other war. Crusade leaders, regiment breakers, warlords in all but name. You were not summoned here by chance. The Imperium does not gamble on chance. It gambles on blood, on faith, and on inevitability." The holo display shifted, zooming in on a region of the galaxy choked in shadow, vox distortions, and warp storm interference. Dozens of red markers pulsed angrily within it. "This," the Inquisitor continued, "is the frontier of our extinction. Hive Fleets converge there. Chaos warbands slip through the tides. Entire sectors go silent. We are not winning. We are not holding the line. We are slowing the inevitable at a cost so vast it cannot be counted in any human tongue." His gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on Achilles. "And yet, the High Lords have authorized something unprecedented, a consolidation of force. A crusade not of reclamation but of prevention, a blade driven into the throat of annihilation itself." The Marines shifted, their armor plates rasping softly. The mortal officers exchanged glances. The psyker shivered, as if feeling a wind no one else could. "And him?" one of the Space Marines asked, his helm turning toward Achilles. "Why is a myth standing among us?" The Inquisitor did not hesitate. "Because the galaxy remembers some names, even when it forgets the faces. Because war has patterns, and some men are born aligned with those patterns. Because we require more than strategy and logistics. We require a symbol, a living paradox, the perfect warrior in an imperfect age." Achilles held the Inquisitor's gaze, unflinching. "And what do you require of your symbol?" he asked. The Inquisitor's eyes darkened, as if shadows had pooled there. "We require you to do what you were always meant to do," he said quietly. "Lead men into the mouth of oblivion, and make oblivion bleed." There it was, that old melody, played on new instruments: lead, fight, die, rise, repeat. But this time, something in the air felt different. He could feel it in the tension of the men around him, in the way the ship itself seemed to hum with a restrained, dreadful anticipation. The crusade they spoke of did not feel like a campaign. It felt like a last throw of the dice. Somewhere deep within the ship, alarms began to pulse, a slow, rhythmic chime, not of immediate danger, but of approaching inevitability. Warp translation preparations, the moment when real space surrendered to nightmare. The lights flickered. For an instant, Achilles thought he saw something else in the holo-display, something vast, coiled just beyond the edge of perception, watching. An omen. The galaxy, it seemed, had more than one set of eyes. The moment the chamber doors sealed shut, the temperature seemed to drop. Not physically, no instrument would have detected it, but in the way the air thickened, like the entire room was inhaling and refusing to exhale. Achilles felt it immediately, the same way he once sensed the shifting moods of Olympus before a divine decree. Here, the gods were replaced by men in robes and armor, yet the weight of their intentions hung just as ominously. The Inquisitor stepped forward, robes trailing behind him like a shadow trying to escape its owner. "Before this crusade begins," he said, "you must understand what you are marching into. The Imperium has kept certain truths buried, for the sake of order, for the sake of hope." His tone sharpened. "For the sake of survival." A servo skull drifted into the center of the chamber, its bone-white shell illuminated by a halo of flickering data streams. With a mechanical whir, it projected a cascade of images into the air. At first, Achilles saw only darkness, a starless void, then movement, a slow, pulsating rhythm, like a heartbeat echoing across a galaxy. The void rippled, something stirred. A resonance twisted through the air, distorting the images, distorting sound, distorting even thought. "What is that?" one of the human officers whispered, already regretting the question. The Inquisitor clasped his hands behind his back. A disturbance. A presence. Something ancient, predating not only the Imperium, but the warp itself as we know it. The images shifted again, now a world being consumed, not by tyrannids, not by chaos, but by something undefined, a phenomenon neither biological nor demonic. Cities crumbled in silence. Matter disassembled into drifting strands of shimmering dust. The sky collapsed inward like a punctured membrane. Achilles felt an instinctive chill. It was not fear, it was recognition. "There are legends in my era," he murmured, "of things before gods, things too old to name." "Then you understand," the Inquisitor said, "why the High Lords of Terra summoned you." The Space Marines remained still, though Achilles saw the minute adjustments in their postures, the tightening of armored gauntlets, the subtle shift of weight. Even giants knew dread. Another holo image erupted, this one depicting warp storms thrashing violently across entire sectors. Rifts splitting open like wounds, spewing nightmares that defied form. But beneath the familiar taint of chaos, there was a second pulse, steady, relentless, alien. An orchestra of calamity. "The warp behaves like a wounded animal," the Inquisitor said, "reactive, hysterical. But recently, its fluctuations have shown pattern, rhythm, direction." He lowered his voice. "Something is pushing from the other side, something that does not belong." A psyker in the chamber staggered, clutching his temples. Blood seeped from his nose. "There are whispers," he gasped. "Not words, not voices, pressure, like being watched by a sun that has learned to hate." Achilles did not need psychic attunement to feel the truth of that description. He remembered the sensation on the holo display in the previous chamber, that unseen gaze brushing against him for a heartbeat. Now he knew it had not been imagination. Something vast had looked his way, something that had no right to see him. The Inquisitor continued, "Entire regions are falling silent, not conquered, not corrupted, silent. Astropaths lose their minds trying to reach them. Fleets vanish without debris. Even chaos grows uneasy in these regions." Another image, a chaos warband, their iconography grotesque, their hulls twisted by the blessings and curses of their patrons. The footage showed them drifting, lifeless, severed from the will of their gods. Daemon fire extinguished like candles in a storm. The assembled warriors stared in stunned silence. For even chaos, especially chaos, did not die quietly. "This entity," the Inquisitor said, "is not a god, not a species, not a force we can categorize. It is simply older. Older than the concept of war, older than the warp, older than the primordial conflicts that birthed the most ancient beings we know." He turned toward Achilles. "And it has begun to awaken." The holo display shifted again, revealing tech priests surrounding an altar of machinery. Arcane devices whirred, tubes pulsed with fluid, gene scrolls rolled open by servo arms. A man lay on the table, screaming as augmentation needles pierced his flesh. Achilles clenched his jaw. The others flinched. A few looked away. "This is what we have tried," the Inquisitor said. "Soldiers improved, augmented, transformed. We have attempted to create the perfect commander, the perfect strategist, the perfect warrior." The image flickered to another, an enhanced officer tearing apart his own skull. The next image, a space marine writhing as his organs turned to crystal. The next, an entire squad fused into a single mass of screaming biomass, alive and aware. "None survived," the Inquisitor said flatly. "The warp rejects artificial perfection. The entity rejects artificial adaptation. Both forces respond, violently." The meaning dawned on Achilles like a slow sunrise over a battlefield. "So you sought someone who is not artificial," he said. "Precisely. the Inquisitor answered. Perfection born, not engineered. Achilles swallowed hard, not out of fear, but frustration. He had not asked for perfection. He had not asked to be shaped into a symbol of war. He had not asked to be anything other than himself. And yet, destiny, whether divine or imperial, kept dragging him back into its grasp. You were pulled from the warp for a reason, the Inquisitor continued. Perhaps by accident, perhaps by design. No one knows. But what we do know is this: you endured the warp without madness. You emerged whole, and you carry within you a warrior's instincts, so sharp they function like prophecy. Achilles felt the memory of his arrival in this era, the tearing sensation, the blinding light, the sense of falling through layers of reality like drowning in eternity. He had thought it random chance, a cruel joke, a punishment. But now something darker slipped beneath the surface of his thoughts. He had been taken, not lost. The Inquisitor gestured, and the holo display shifted once more, now showing a vast region of space surrounded by tight concentric rings of warp storms. This, he said, is where we are sending the Crusade, into the maw of the unknown, into the shadow that is swallowing our worlds. Silence stretched long and taut. One of the mortal officers finally found the courage to speak. And what are we expected to do when we reach it? Record, the Inquisitor said. Report, survive, if possible, but above all delay. Delay? Achilles asked. The Inquisitor met his eyes. Yes, delay. For if this entity awakens fully, we will not win. We will not negotiate. We will not survive. We can only buy time. Time for the Emperor's plans. Time for mankind's last contingencies. Time for something, anything to change. Achilles spoke quietly. And my role? The Inquisitor exhaled. It was the closest he had come to sounding human. Your role is to do what no one else in this room can do, he said. Stand at the front. Unite the broken, the desperate, and the damned. Give them a chance to fight with purpose instead of fear. He stepped closer, voice dropping to a reverent whisper. You must become our spear, the sharpened edge of our last hope. Achilles did not answer immediately. His heartbeat was slow, measured, his breath steady. Yet his mind churned. He had once been the spear of Greece. Now they wanted him to be the spear of mankind. He looked at the holo display one more time, the swirling darkness, the silent worlds, the nameless hunger awakening in the void. And for the first time since he had arrived in this broken age, he felt something unfamiliar. Not fate, not destiny, but inevitability. This was not a battle he could choose. This was a battle that had chosen him. The chamber where they took Achilles was unlike any he had entered before. It was neither forge nor shrine, though it bore the markings of both. At its center stood a colossal dais of black adamantium, inscribed with circuitry and symbols older than the Imperium itself. Servo arms dangled from the ceiling like the limbs of some slumbering steel arachnid. Vats of glowing fluid pulsed with rhythmic light, as though pumping the lifeblood of a machine god dreaming in silence. Tech priests circled the platform in a slow ritualistic pattern, chanting in binary tones that rose and fell like mechanical Gregorian hymns. Their voices layered with the whirring of servos and the hiss of pneumatics, as if the air itself prayed for deliverance. Achilles stood at the threshold, watching. He had seen altars before, altars dedicated to gods of thunder, gods of the sea, gods who toyed with the lives of men like games played upon marble floors. But this was no altar of Olympus. This was a crucible, a place where flesh was unmade and remade according to the cold logic of survival. Step forward, the tech priest Magos intoned. His voice was a blend of human breath and metallic resonance. The transfiguration must begin. Achilles did not move. He stared at the dais, at the cables coiled like vipers, at the surgical instruments glinting with a too-eager sheen, at the neurospikes that would soon pierce his spine and skull. The memory of the last attempt, those failed soldiers, those twisted masses lingered like an omen. What happens here, Achilles said quietly, is not meant for mortals. You are not mortal, the Magos replied. Not anymore. And Achilles felt the weight of the truth. He had not aged since emerging from the warp. His wounds healed faster than they should. His strength had grown, not diminished, despite battles that should have broken him. The sticks had made him more than human. The warp had made him stranger still. Perhaps this was inevitable. He approached the dais. As he lay down, the platform felt colder than the deepest pit of Tartarus. Mechanical restraints snapped into place with a finality that recalled shackles of destiny more than chains of steel. The tech priests swarmed him like carrion birds eager for offerings. "We begin," the Magos whispered. Then the agony started. It was not the sharp, fleeting agony of a blade. It was deep, hungering. An agony that crawled into his bones, burrowed into his nerves, twisted his sinews until he felt as though his body were being rewritten letter by letter, muscle by muscle. Serrated probes dug into his flesh. A neurospike slid into the base of his skull, cold and merciless. Fluid filled with nanites surged into his veins, burning like molten suns. 1,000 tiny machines raced through him, tearing down what they deemed weak, reconstructing what they deemed essential. Achilles clenched his jaw, but no cry escaped his lips. The pain was familiar in its rhythm. He had tasted it before when the river Styx had embraced him, when the spear of the gods had pierced his heel, when the warp had torn him from time and spat him into the far future. Pain was a language he understood. The machines dug deeper. He saw flashes, fragments of memory exploding behind his eyes, Troy burning, Hector falling beneath his spear, Patroclus laughing in the morning sun, the gods whispering warnings he had ignored, the river Styx closing around him like a coffin filled with liquid night. Then the memories changed. He saw the Imperium's wars, 1,000,000,000 soldiers dying on nameless fields, Astartes chanting litanies of hatred, titans striding across continents like metal colossi, the emperor on his golden throne, a corpse god dreaming in static and lightning. The two sets of memories collided, merged, bled into one another. The nanites reached his heart. Achilles gasped. For a moment, he saw everything. Not through his eyes, but through something vaster, something ancient, woven into the marrow of reality. He saw the warp as a sea of agony and emotion, its tides shifting with every human fear. He saw the Hive Fleets as storms of hunger, devouring thought and flesh without distinction. He saw chaos gods screaming across eternity, wounded by something even they did not understand. And beyond them, a darkness, not evil, not cruel, not alive, just inevitable. A force stirring at the edges of existence, like a slumbering titan exhaling its first breath in billions of years. His mind buckled. His spine arched violently against the restraints as the neurospike detonated synaptic pathways to carve new ones. His nerves screamed, his vision fractured into 1,000 shards of light. "Subject is entering Phase 3, the Magos said calmly, as if monitoring the boiling of water. Achilles was no longer certain where his body ended and the machinery began. He felt his bones densifying, his muscles knitting into new configurations, his reflexes accelerating, his blood changing. He felt his mortal self peel away, layer by fragile layer. Was this death? Was this rebirth? Was this evolution? Or was this the final cruelty of a galaxy that demanded sacrifices without end? The pain surged again, swallowing thought. His breath caught. His heartbeat faltered. The nanites surged into his lungs, into his brain, into the smallest corners of his flesh. He felt himself dissolving. He felt himself expanding. He was no longer Achilles of Greece. He was no longer the wanderer torn from Troy. He was no longer the anomaly drifting through Imperium battlefields. He was becoming something else, something forged not by gods, but by necessity, not by prophecy, but by desperation, not by divine design, but by mortal terror. His vision went white. For an instant, he stood on the shores of the Styx again. The river whispered as it once had, cold and eternal. But another whisper joined it. A mechanical whisper. A metallic prayer. A binary litany sung by machine spirits trying to teach him their cruel, efficient truths. Then he heard a third whisper, vast, distant, yet terrifyingly close. The whisper of the awakening entity. It felt him. It recognized him. And in that recognition, he felt an ancient truth. Whatever he was becoming, it was something the entity feared, or hungered for. The white light pulsed. His heart stopped. Then it restarted stronger, heavier, resonant, like a war drum forged in the heart of a dying star. The restraints unlocked. The machines withdrew. The chanting of the tech priests fell silent. Achilles rose slowly, every movement controlled, precise, predatory. His armor seemed lighter, his strength deeper, his senses sharper. The shadows around him bent subtly, as if acknowledging him. The Magos approached, awe replacing his usual emotionless tone. "It is done," he said. "You have crossed the threshold." Achilles flexed his fingers, feeling the power thrumming beneath his skin. "What am I now?" he asked quietly. The Magos bowed his head. "Not Astartes, not Primarch, not mortal." He stepped back, giving Achilles space, reverence, distance. "You are what the Imperium could never create. In this age of endings." His voice trembled with something close to worship. "You have become our unnamed Primarch." Achilles closed his eyes, feeling the war inside him settle into a single, unified truth. He had been reforged, and the galaxy would tremble. When Achilles opened his eyes again, the chamber felt smaller, too small to contain the presence now coiled within him. The world around him seemed sharpened, as if reality had gained new edges. He sensed the psychic residue left on the walls, the faint tension of machine spirits waiting nervously, the undertone of fear in the tech priest's mechanical chants. He breathed in, and the air vibrated, responding like a living thing. "Your senses will continue to adapt," the Magos murmured, standing at a safe distance. "The transfiguration is not complete. It will evolve as you evolve." Achilles said nothing. His mind was still sifting through echoes of pain, whispers of ancient memories and new instincts fusing into something formidable and alien. Then suddenly, a shift, a pressure, subtle, lurking just beyond the threshold of perception. Achilles stiffened. It was as if an invisible hand brushed against the edges of his mind, a foreign presence, not intrusive, not violent, not yet, but curious. Watching, he turned his gaze upward, to nowhere and everywhere. The shadows seemed to thicken, as if leaning closer. "It sees me." The thought formed in his head before he realized it was his. A psyker stationed at the chamber's entrance screamed, collapsing to his knees as blood streamed from his eyes. "It's awake," he choked, trembling violently. "It's looking through the void through him. No. Too large, too close." His voice fractured into sobs. The tech priests scrambled, data streams spiking erratically as their instruments malfunctioned from the psychic backlash. Lights flickered. Servo skulls overloaded and dropped like stones. A klaxon wailed. The Inquisitor rushed into the chamber, cloak billowing, face carved from stone. What happened? The psyker clawed at the floor, leaving streaks of blood. It found him. It knows him. The Inquisitor's jaw tightened. "Get him out of here, now." But Achilles remained standing utterly still, because he saw it, not with eyes, not with enhanced senses, but with whatever had awakened deep within him during the transfiguration. The galaxy opened before him like a wound. Stars flickered like embers drowning in an unseen tide. Warp storms pulsed in unnatural rhythm. He saw fleets imperial, Xenos, heretical, drifting helplessly, caught in invisible currents. And in the darkness between it all, something stirred. Massive, formless, ancient. It was like staring into the pupil of a sleeping god. A hunger without emotion. A presence without identity. A will that never needed to speak, because existence itself bent around its awakening. It was older than the warp. Older than the Astronomican's first light. Older than every war ever fought. Achilles could not name it, but he felt its cold recognition. It wasn't aware of Achilles the mortal. It wasn't aware of Achilles, the hero, the myth, the warrior. It was aware of what Achilles had become, and it responded. A pulse rippled through the void, a silent roar that made the air in the chamber tremble. Instruments exploded, the psyker convulsed. Space Marines outside the chamber fell to one knee, instinctively activating psychic wards. The Magos screamed as his augmetics overloaded, sparks erupting from the ports on his skull. Achilles did not fall. He stood firm. Every fiber of his body resonated with the pulse, accepting it, absorbing it, reflecting it. It was not an attack. It was acknowledgement. A mark. A challenge. A promise. The darkness withdrew, shrinking back into the abyss. The pressure vanished. The lights stabilized. The klaxons died. The Inquisitor inhaled shakily. "Tell me what you saw," he demanded, staring at Achilles with a mixture of dread and awe. Achilles closed his eyes. At first, there was silence. Then his voice, low and steady. "A shadow older than chaos. A presence that does not hate us, because hate is too small for it. A force that does not conquer, because conquest is beneath it." He opened his eyes. "It unmakes, not from cruelty, not from anger, simply because it is awakening, and existence cannot survive its waking." The room fell deathly silent. One of the space marines whispered, "A god?" Achilles shook his head. "Not a god. Gods are petty and loud. This," he paused, searching for words that did not exist. "This is the death of gods." The Inquisitor swallowed, his resolve wavering for the first time. "Does it know you?" Achilles nodded slowly. "It touched my mind and felt its reflection. Whatever I have become, it recognizes the threat. That alone would have been enough to break lesser men." But Achilles continued, "And it is afraid." The words struck the chamber like a hammer blow. The Psyker sobbed harder. Several tech priests retreated behind columns of machinery. The Space Marines clenched their fists, uncertain whether to feel hope or terror. The Inquisitor's eyes widened. Afraid? Something that ancient? That vast? Achilles stepped off the dais, and the entire chamber seemed to recoil as his transformed presence filled it. "Yes," he said, voice quiet but absolute. "Because I have become something the galaxy has not seen in millennia. Something born of flesh but forged for war, something the warp cannot corrupt and this entity cannot ignore." He lifted his spear, no longer just a weapon, but an extension of his new being. The metal hummed with a resonance that was both mechanical and divine. "I have become inevitability." The Inquisitor exhaled, shaken. "Then the High Lords were right to summon you." Achilles turned toward the chamber exit, feeling the lingering echo of the entity's attention fading into the cosmic dark. "No," he said, "they summoned me too late." He paused, staring into the endless metal corridors ahead. But not too late to fight. Behind him, the holo displays flickered one last time, showing a sector of space that had gone dark minutes earlier. No signals, no survivors, no debris. Just absence. A perfect, clean absence. As if something had inhaled an entire star system. Achilles felt the weight of what he must do settle onto his shoulders like a mantle made of the galaxy's last hopes. "The Crusade begins," he whispered. And somewhere, deep in the abyss, something smiled. The warship groaned like an ancient beast awakening as the command was given. Across its vast hull, lumens ignited in cascading patterns, turning cathedral spires into pillars of cold fire. Gears the size of fortress gates rotated into place. Reactor cores growled with renewed fury. Vox horns howled orders in dozens of dialects. The machine spirit of the Titangent-class vessel stirred, whispering in metallic hymns. Achilles stood at the Strategium's central platform, overlooking the vast hololithic sphere of the embattled sectors ahead. The lights beneath his feet pulsed in slow cadence, as if syncing themselves to his heartbeat, no longer merely mortal, no longer bound by the frailties of flesh. Around him, an army awaited his word. The Astartes stood in rigid ranks, statues carved from layers of ceramite and fury. Their eyes, gene-forged, war-proven, watched Achilles with a strange mixture of suspicion, reverence, and something else they rarely felt, uncertainty. They were warriors engineered to follow gods among men. And yet, the being standing before them was neither god nor man. He was something born of both and something beyond either. The mortal officers, hardened by the attrition of endless fronts, bowed their heads instinctively. Even the tech priests quieted, their mechanical limbs stilled as if devotions were unnecessary in the presence of a living aberration of perfection. Achilles inhaled slowly. The air tasted like war ozone, machine oil, incense, and the faint bitterness of human fear. "Report," he said. The Inquisitor stepped forward, his posture stiff, his cloak rippling with the static of Vox transmissions. "The outer systems have already fallen silent. Our scouts report an absence of debris. No bodies, no Vox ghosts. Simply nothing." "Chaos?" Achilles asked. "No," the Inquisitor answered. "Chaos does not leave silence, it leaves screams." A hollow image rippled before them, a once inhabited world now scraped clean, its atmosphere erased, its oceans gone. Only bedrock remained smooth and cold, as if polished by invisible hands. Achilles felt the same pressure at the edge of his mind, softer now, like a predator testing the air for scent. Watching him, learning him. He ignored it. Another officer, his voice barely steady, spoke from the console. "Hive Fleet Leviathan has changed course, redirecting. It's as if the Tyranids are fleeing." Fleeing. The word carried a blasphemous weight. Tyranids devoured galaxies. They fled from nothing. Achilles stepped closer. The hololithic projection responded instantly, enlarging to show the shifted vectors. Indeed, the vast biological armada of Leviathan was swerving violently away from the darkened sector. "Even monsters know fear." The Inquisitor's voice lowered. "They are running from what awakened. If Tyranids are retreating, then what lies ahead is beyond anything we've faced." Achilles' expression was calm, unshaken, final. "Then we go toward it." No one argued. Not because they agreed, but because they understood he was not asking permission. The Magos activated a rune. Klaxons erupted through the ship. Servitors moved in orchestrated chaos. Massive armored shutters sealed the strategium as the vessel's engines began their deadly symphony. "Prepare for warp translation," the Helmmaster shouted. Achilles felt the warp before it opened a shift in the air like a great exhalation from a wounded god. The warp did not feel like it once had. There was no chaotic roar, no maddening whispers. It felt suppressed, as if something in real space eclipsed even the power of the Imperium. A ripple, a tear, a scream of reality stretched thin. Then the vessel plunged into the warp. The hull trembled as warp tides surged around them, but Achilles stood steady, unmovable, like a figure carved from celestial stone. The darkness flared with ephemeral shapes and claws that reached toward the ship but recoiled at the sight of him. The Space Marines stared, silent. The warp recoiled from Achilles, like prey recognizing something older than itself. After what felt like eternity measured in breaths, they breached real space again. The ship emerged into a graveyard of stars. A decayed sun flickered ahead like a dying ember. Planetary orbits were empty scars, absent mass, no dust, no satellites, no remnants. A voice trembled through the Vox. "By the throne, what happened here?" Achilles knew. Unmaking. It left behind perfect nothingness. He turned to the assembled warriors. "The Crusade begins here," he said quietly. "Not to reclaim, not to conquer, but to endure." He lifted his spear. Light shimmered along its edge, resonating with his presence, humming with an authority that bent both flesh and metal. "Each battle we fight will not be for victory but for time. Time for mankind, time for the Emperor, time for whatever comes after us." His gaze swept across them, piercing armor, augmetics, and soul alike. "We will face what even chaos fears. We will confront what drives Tyranids to flee. We will enter systems already claimed by oblivion, and we will leave our mark upon them." Astartes straightened unconsciously, psychers steadied, officers regained their breath. Achilles continued, "Some of you will die. Most of you will die. But your deaths will slow the darkness, delay it, wound it, enough for others to live." His voice deepened. "You are no longer soldiers of the Imperium, you are its final city wall." Silence. Then, a single space marine struck his gauntlet against his chestplate. echoing like a thunderclap, then another, and another, until the strategium vibrated with the impact of countless fists. A drumbeat of defiance, a cathedral shaking with the promise of war, a vow made not to a god, but to a warrior who had become myth. Achilles lowered his spear. "Prepare planetary descent," he said. "We make landfall on the nearest world. We will see what remains." The Magos tapped runes. Dropships awakened. Weapon decks cycled. Orbital cannons aligned. Achilles walked toward the embarkation hangar, every step resonating like the slow tolling of a funeral bell. Behind him, the Crusade followed. Ahead of him, the galaxy waited, broken, bleeding, and afraid. He paused only once, gazing through a viewing port at the hollowed star system below. And the vast presence, distant but attentive, brushed against his mind. Achilles whispered into the void, "Come then." The darkness trembled, amused, hungry, interested, and Achilles stepped forward, ready to lead mankind into the fire. The planet below was a sphere of muted color, gray continents drowned beneath blackened skies, oceans reduced to still sheets of obsidian. No wind moved across its surface, no storms broke the silence. It was a world that had been emptied, not destroyed, a corpse without a wound. As Achilles descended toward it in the lead dropship, he felt no tremor of life, no heartbeat of nature, no hidden pulse of hibernating creatures. Even death had forsaken this place. It was not a graveyard. It was a memory. The dropships landed in perfect formation, kicking up dust that floated lazily, as though gravity itself hesitated. Space Marines marched forth, their boots echoing unnaturally loud against the silent stone. The wind didn't carry the sound away. It simply vanished, swallowed by the stillness. Achilles stepped onto the surface. For a long moment, he simply listened, and the galaxy answered with nothing. No whisper of danger, no trace of survivors, no residual screams carved into psychic airwaves. Nothing. He walked forward, spear lowered but ready. His enhanced senses reached outward, probing the dead horizon. Astartes fanned out around him, scanning, documenting, uneasy. Even their gene-forged discipline strained beneath the weight of an impossibly pristine desolation. A mortal officer approached him, face pale. "There are structures ahead, my lord. Empty, perfectly intact. No signs of struggle, no decay, no microbial life. Show me." They reached what once had been a city. Its towers stood immaculate, untouched by erosion or war. Streets lay unbroken, their metallic surfaces smooth as polished bone. Doors hung open, not broken, not forced, simply open, as if every inhabitant had stepped out at the same moment and never returned. Achilles paused beside a wall etched with pictograms. He touched it lightly. It felt cold, not with the cold of death, but the cold of a wound that never bled. A psyker behind him stifled a cry. "My lord," he whispered, "the walls are quiet, too quiet. Nothing of the warp touches this place. It is outside the Imperium. It is cut off from everything." Achilles turned his gaze upward. The sky was a still, grey dome, and something watched him through it. His breath deepened. The presence returned not as a pulse, not as pressure, but as a vast, unblinking attention. It was patient, inquisitive, testing. Achilles stepped into the city center, where a monumental plaza opened like a stone sea. A single obelisk stood at the center, seamless and impossibly tall, reaching toward a sky that refused to acknowledge it. As Achilles approached, the surface of the obelisk rippled not physically, but conceptually. His vision blurred for a heartbeat. Images flickered through his mind, worlds erased, systems hollowed out, stars dimming without heat or collapse. Existence peeled back in layers. All returned to the same nothingness. The Inquisitor approached slowly, reverently, voice trembling. "Is this the origin?" Achilles shook his head. "No, this is only its footprint." The ground beneath them vibrated, not with seismic force, but with metaphysical weight. A shadow fell across the plaza, not cast by a sun, but by an idea. Something was descending, not in space, not in time, but in awareness. Achilles felt it reach toward him again. Not hostile, not benevolent, simply inevitable. He steadied himself. "Stand back," he commanded. Space Marines obeyed without question. Officers retreated. The Psychers shielded their minds with trembling hands. Achilles alone remained before the obelisk. The presence pressed against his thoughts, seeking to understand him. It was not language, it was not emotion. It was the weight of a concept far older than conflict, far older than creation. He lifted his spear. "I am Achilles," he said into the silence, "son of Peleus, forged by the river Styx, reborn in the fires of your galaxy." The presence answered not in sound, but in a ripple of reality that made the air vibrate and the city shimmer. It recognized him, because he was not merely Achilles anymore. He was something reforged, something dangerous, a blade honed against the whetstone of annihilation. Achilles raised his chin, defying the enormity pressing upon him. "I will not let you take this galaxy," he whispered. "If mankind must fall, it will fall screaming, not silently." The obelisk pulsed once, and the presence recoiled, not far, not in fear, but in acknowledgement, a warrior's acknowledgement. Achilles lowered his spear. Behind him, the Inquisitor dared to speak. What happened? Achilles stared at the heavens, at the dark curve of space where distant suns flickered like dying candles. "It has seen me," he said quietly. "It will come, but it knows now that something in this galaxy will stand in its way." "And us?" the Inquisitor asked. Achilles closed his eyes. "You will fight. You will die. And through your deaths, mankind will gain moments, seconds, maybe centuries, but you will buy the time that must be bought." He opened his eyes again, glowing with a faint, unnatural luminance. "As for me," he turned slowly, feeling the weight of destiny settle upon him like a coronation made of chains and fire. "I will be its echo." He stepped away from the obelisk. The ground grew warmer beneath his feet. The sky darkened. The presence withdrew, but not fully. It lingered, watching, waiting, learning. Achilles walked toward the dropships. His crusade fell in behind him like a second shadow. One of the Astartes spoke softly, reverently. "What are you now, my lord?" Achilles did not look back. "I am the scream at the end of time," he said. "I am the defiance that remains when everything else is gone. I am the nameless Primarch of humanity's final war." The wind finally stirred across the dead world, a breath of life given shape only by his presence. And in that whisper of air, carried across the empty stone, echoed a prophecy not spoken, but understood. In the age of ending, when all lights fade, Achilles will still be fighting, and the dark will know his name.